The model. On a bright July day, the small town of Etretat shimmered under the midday sun. It was nestled between two cliffs that stretched into the sea, forming a crescent shape. The white cliffs and beach contrasted beautifully with the deep blue of the ocean. The town's bell tower, almost as tall as the cliffs themselves, stood proudly, tapering to a point as it reached for the sky. Down on the beach, people were scattered across the sands, watching the bathers play in the water. Meanwhile, on the terrace of the casino, another crowd was gathered, either sitting or walking, their colorful outfits and parasols creating a patchwork of bright colors under the brilliant sky. Away from the busy terrace, on a quieter path, a young man named Jean Sumner walked beside a wheelchair. In it sat his wife, a young woman whose legs had been rendered useless. A servant gently pushed the chair as the woman looked out at the joyous day, her expression filled with melancholy. They walked in silence, not once looking at each other. "Let's stop for a bit," the young woman finally said. They halted, and the painter Jean sat down on a small stool handed to him by the servant. As people walked past the silent couple, they cast sympathetic glances their way. A story of deep devotion surrounded them. It was said that Jean had married her despite her disability, touched by her deep love for him. Not far from the couple, two young men sat on a bench, chatting as they gazed out at the horizon. "No, I tell you, I know Jean Sumner well," said one of the men. "But why did he marry her? She was already paralyzed when they got married, wasn't she?" asked the other. "Exactly. He married her just like people often do, because he was a fool." "But why? Why? Why do people do foolish things? There's no reason. They just do. And besides, you know how painters are. They have a thing for making foolish marriages. They often marry models or former lovers, sometimes even women with questionable reputations. Why? Who knows? You'd think being around models all the time would make them tired of that kind of woman. But no, they end up marrying them. Read that book by Alphonse Daudet, Artists' Wives. It's so true, so cruel, and so beautifully written. In Jean's case, though, it happened in a rather tragic way. The woman played a risky game to win him over. Did she love him? Who knows? Can we ever really know how much of what a woman does is sincere? Women are a mystery, constantly shifting in their feelings. They can be furious, devoted, criminal, admirable, and base, all at once. They lie without meaning to, and yet they're honest in their emotions. Their actions are often driven by impulses we can't understand. They're always surprising us with their sudden decisions, which we can never predict. We're always left wondering, is she being sincere or is she pretending? But the truth is, women are both sincere and insincere at the same time. That's just who they are. They have a way of getting what they want, especially when it comes to marriage. Their methods are so complex that we can never guess them beforehand, yet so simple that once we've been fooled, we can't help but be amazed at how easily they tricked us. And they always succeed, especially when it comes to marriage. But here's what happened with Jean. The woman was, of course, a model. She posed for him. She was pretty, stylish, and had a body that seemed almost divine. He thought he loved her with all his heart. That's another strange thing about love. When we fall for someone, we truly believe we can't live without them for the rest of our lives. Even though we know from experience that passion eventually fades, we still convince ourselves that this time is different. To live with someone, you need more than just physical attraction. You need a deep connection of souls, temperaments, and emotions. But when you're in love, it's hard to tell whether your feelings are coming from the heart or just a temporary physical attraction. Well, Jean thought he was in love. He made her all sorts of promises and was devoted to her. She had that Parisian charm, full of energy and wit. She talked a lot, made silly comments that somehow sounded clever because of the way she said them. Her gestures were graceful, always catching a painter's eye. Whether she was raising her arms, bending over, or getting into a carriage, her movements were always perfect. For 3 months, Jean didn't realize that, deep down, she was just like any other model. He rented a little house for her for the summer in Andrassy. I was there one evening when Jean first began to have doubts. It was a beautiful evening, so we decided to take a walk along the riverbank. The moon was shining brightly, casting a golden light on the rippling water. We walked in silence, lost in the serene beauty of the night. It was one of those moments that makes you feel like you could do anything, love anyone, achieve any dream. The coolness of the night air seemed to fill us with peace and happiness. Suddenly Josephine, that's her name, exclaimed, "Oh, did you see that big fish jump over there?" Jean, lost in thought, replied without looking, "Yes, dear." She got upset. "No, you didn't see it. You weren't even looking." He smiled. "You're right. It's just so lovely out here that I wasn't thinking about anything." She fell silent, but after a minute, she couldn't help herself and asked, "Are you going to Paris tomorrow?" "I'm not sure," he replied. Once again, she got annoyed. "Do you think it's fun to walk around without talking? People usually talk when they're not idiots." He didn't respond. Sensing that she was about to make him angry, she began to sing a popular song that had been stuck in everyone's heads for 2 years. He murmured, "Please stop." "Why should I stop?" she asked angrily. "You're ruining the moment," he said. Then, out of nowhere, an argument broke out. It was a ridiculous argument, full of baseless accusations, tears, and hurtful words. They eventually returned to the house, with Jean allowing her to vent her frustrations without saying much in return. He was too entranced by the beauty of the night to care about her complaints. 3 months later, Jean was desperate to break free from the toxic relationship. She had become a tyrant, making his life unbearable. They argued constantly, hurling insults at each other, and even resorting to physical fights. He decided he had to end it, no matter the cost. He sold all his paintings, borrowed money from his friends, and managed to gather 20,000 francs. One morning, he left the money for her along with a farewell note and came to stay with me. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and a woman barged in, pushing past me into my studio. It was her. Jean stood up as she entered. She threw the envelope of money at his feet with a dramatic gesture and said, "Take your money. I don't want it." She was trembling, clearly on the verge of doing something drastic. Jean, too, looked pale with rage and frustration, ready to snap. "What do you want?" he asked. "I won't be treated like some cheap woman," she said. "You begged me to be with you. I never asked for anything. So now keep me with you." Jean stomped his foot in anger. "No. This is too much. If you think you can." I grabbed his arm. "Jean, calm down. Let me handle this." I turned to her and tried to reason with her, using all the arguments you would in a situation like this. She listened, standing still, her gaze fixed, stubborn and silent. Finally, when I ran out of things to say and saw that this was heading for a disaster, I thought of one last trick. I said, "He still loves you, but his family wants him to marry someone else, you understand?" She jolted and exclaimed, "Oh, now I see." Turning to Jean, she asked, "You're getting married?" He replied firmly, "Yes." She took a step closer. "If you marry someone else, I'll kill myself. Do you hear me?" Jean shrugged and said, "Well, then kill yourself." She was so shocked that she could barely speak. "What? What did you say? Say it again." He repeated, "If you want to kill yourself, go ahead." Her face went pale, and she said, "Don't dare me. I'll jump out the window." He laughed, walked over to the window, opened it wide, and with a mocking gesture said, "Go ahead after you." She stared at him with wild, desperate eyes for a moment. Then, without hesitation, she rushed past both of us, ran to the window, and jumped. I'll never forget the sight of that open window after I watched her body disappear through it. It seemed so vast, like it was as big as the sky itself, and for a moment, I felt an irrational fear that I might fall out of it too. Jean stood there, frozen in shock. They brought. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Jean walked silently beside his wife Claire, who sat in her wheelchair. Neither had spoken a word for what felt like hours. The lively scenes around them, the joyful laughter of children, the chatter of couples, the soothing sound of the waves, felt distant, almost as if they belonged to another world, one in which they no longer had a place. Their lives had been irrevocably changed by the tragic incident that had taken place several years ago. Jean couldn't shake the memory of that fateful day when Josephine, the woman he once believed he loved, had leaped from the window in a moment of desperate anguish. The image of her broken body lying on the ground haunted him still, a constant reminder of the cruelty of fate and the consequences of his own actions. After the accident, Jean had felt a crushing sense of guilt. He was consumed by remorse, unable to escape the thought that he was responsible for Josephine's suffering. Despite his initial determination to end their toxic relationship, he found himself unable to abandon her in her time of need. He had promised himself that he would take care of her, that he would do right by her in the only way he knew how. So, he married her. Their marriage was not built on love, but rather on a sense of duty and obligation. Jean tried to convince himself that he was doing the right thing, but deep down, he knew that he was trapped. Trapped by the weight of his own guilt, by the expectations of others, and by the bleak future that now stretched out before him. Claire, for her part, had never wanted to be a burden. She had once been full of life, a vibrant woman with dreams and aspirations. But the accident had taken all of that away. Now, she was confined to a wheelchair, her spirit crushed by the realization that she would never walk again. She knew that Jean had married her out of pity, not love, and that knowledge ate away at her every day. As they made their way back to their home, Claire finally broke the silence. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper as she said, "Jean, do you ever regret it? Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" Jean hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He had asked himself that same question countless times, but he had never been able to find an answer that satisfied him. After a long pause, he finally said, "I don't know, Claire. I don't know what might have been. All I know is that we have to live with the choices we've made." Claire nodded, her eyes downcast. She had hoped for something more, a glimmer of hope perhaps, that things could still change. But Jean's words only confirmed what she already knew. This was their life now, and there was no escaping it. The rest of the walk home was silent, the air heavy with unspoken thoughts and feelings. When they finally reached their house, Jean helped Claire inside and settled her into a chair by the window. The room was dimly lit, the last rays of sunlight casting long shadows across the floor. Jean stood by the window, staring out at the darkening sky. He felt a deep, hollow emptiness inside, a void that no amount of painting or creative expression could fill. He had once believed that art could save him, that it could provide an escape from the harsh realities of life. But now, even that seemed like a distant dream. "Jean," Claire's voice brought him back to the present. "I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. I know it hasn't been easy, and I know that you've sacrificed a lot." Jean turned to look at her, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the evening light. There was a sadness in her eyes, a sadness that he knew all too well. "I just wish." Claire's voice trailed off, and she looked away, unable to finish her sentence. "What is it, Claire?" Jean asked gently, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "I just wish we could be happy," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I wish things could have been different." Jean felt a lump in his throat, a wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. He wanted to tell her that things could still change, that they could still find happiness, but he knew it would be a lie. The truth was that they were both prisoners of their past, trapped by the choices they had made and the circumstances that had brought them together. In the quiet of the evening, they sat together in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The world outside continued on, indifferent to their pain, as the night slowly descended, wrapping them in its cold embrace. And so, life went on, day after day, a monotonous routine that neither of them could escape. Jean continued to paint, though his work no longer brought him the joy it once had. Claire continued to live, though her life felt empty and devoid of purpose. They were two souls bound together by fate, but forever apart in their hearts. And in the end, that was perhaps the greatest tragedy of all.
Thank you for listening. Like, subscribe and share our channel Magic Mingle with your friends to enjoy more magical stories.